Hey guys, so I just finished watching. Yes, I binge watched all the episodes. Kind of took my time in watching them. Paused here and there to take care of a few things, get something to eat. Get changed, make my bed, stuff like that. Check the mail, do an Amazon package opening, and so on. But yeah, I watched all 6 episodes of the Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary, which is a limited series on Netflix. I don't know what that means, whether or not it's for a limited time only, like maybe for the rest of the year or something like that. I can't really say. But I will say this. The one thing they did do at the beginning in the first episode is they put disclaimers. They didn't do this, I think, for some of the other episodes. I think like episode 2, and then I think 3 they didn't do it for, but then episodes 4, 5, and 6 they did it. But basically, for the first episode, because they did touch upon it there a little bit, and then for the final episode, of course, they really touched upon it. But basically, they informed us through these basically these disclaimers, if you will, that basically all these interviews took place between 2020 and 2022 initially, and that some of the newer ones took place earlier this year. And I will say this: I'm not going to talk about everything in each and every. I'm not. I'm not going to touch upon all the stuff they talked about in all the 6 episodes. But I will say that what we learn in here, we've kind of heard about before in other documentaries and other shows and stuff. You know, we've kind of heard about things very similar. So, like with episode 2 and I think between episode 2, 1, 2, and 3, basically, we don't, we don't really learn too much in what we've already known, essentially, about certain things about, the creation of WrestleMania, his upbringing and stuff like that. It's kind of like, it's an extension. You do learn some newer things. And I recommend, because like I said, I'm not going to talk about everything here, but I do recommend checking out the series if you have Netflix. Binge watch it if you want to, or take your time with it. But I will say, but like I said, there are some things in there that we've already known about through various like WWE documentaries, like the McMahon DVD and stuff. Like like what we hear from places like Dark Side of the Ring, and Tales from the Territory and so on. It's kind of, there are stories that they touch upon here that are similar to those kind of stories we've heard in those shows. And again, it's just, you get a little bit more of an extension as to why, certain things happen and all that. And yeah, it's really interesting. I will say that. I will say that it's really interesting, to say the least. I mean, we do find out, because because for one thing, when Vince originally did these interviews for this docu-series, he basically agreed essentially that this would be unfiltered. It would be kind of uncut. It would be like nothing practiced or anything, just basically straight shooting, if you will. Basically saying what's on his mind and such, and what his thoughts are on certain things. And we do learn, we do learn some of the aspects here and there. Like, for example, one of the episodes is called Screwjob. And it starts basically with showing the first Screwjob with Rindy Richter and the Fabulous Moolah, who was portraying herself as the Spider. And basically, the way Vince described it in his own words is that Wendy basically didn't want to do the job. Wendy, there was I guess some kind of disagreement, on the money issue and stuff. And, Vince wanted her to put somebody over because maybe, I think she was on her way out or something was going on, money-wise and everything. Again, you got to go and watch the episode. I was watching them all. I didn't take notes down, but basically, the long end of it is to Vince, Wendy Richter didn't know or didn't understand that, yes, she was the women's champion. She was the face of the women's division, the Hulk Hogan, if you will, of that, for the women's division of that era, but that, the belt was not her property. The belt was Vince's property, and, because it belonged to him, he's initially going to do what he has to do. And basically the thing was, from what he described, is he just told them that when she gets rolled up, just to count the 1, 2, 3, even if she gets her shoulder up or something like that, and thus she would be, screwed out of the championship. So yeah, that basically is what happened. That's basically what, happened in Vince's own words, that he essentially wanted to send a message to Wendy and anybody else at that time that if you're a champion, but you don't want to put someone over on your way out, or you don't want to agree to a certain amount to try to stay, and so on, then I'm going to have you put somebody over, and make them the new champion, whether you like it or not. That's essentially the vibe he gave was, I'm going to make you, I'm going to teach you a lesson on your way out, especially if it's, especially if it means you drop the title and everything, as well. Even if you don't want to, and so on. So that was in his own words. And stuff. But he also said something similar about with Brett. The whole situation with Brett. And we know about Brett and everything there behind the scenes. We know all about it. And, basically, he went and now Brett kind of countered this because they did interview Brett for this. And Brett countered this by saying, look, I don't know where they get this whole notion that Vince just let me have a free shot at him. Because the way Brett puts it, and Brett is more to be believed, I think, in some cases, is they locked up. They basically tussled a little bit before Brett laid an uppercut on Vince and knocked him out. So I'm tending to believe Brett more in that aspect when it comes to things. What else? They did talk about, now this was what was interesting too, because, some people will watch these episodes and be like, well, some of these episodes feel like they're just focusing not on Vince, but on this individual and that individual. And it does feel like that, I will say that, because, when they, in the earlier episodes, when they were talking about the expansion of the company and everything, it felt like you weren't watching it felt basically like it was transitioning from being a Vince docuseries to a docuseries on Hogan, or a docuseries on Cena and stuff like that. And it felt, and you're basically like, or a docuseries on, Rock or Undertaker, and it, and it's like, what is going on? It's not just about Vince. And, that's essentially what it felt like, and everything, essentially what it felt like. And basically, they talk about the whole thing with WrestleMania 3. And Vince basically says that he had been talking with Andre, and Andre was like considering, hey, I'm going to hang it up, do these other things. My body's beat down. I just, I'll just step away and everything, because Andre needed back surgery and he couldn't get it. But Vince wanted Andre for WrestleMania 3 at the Silverdome. And he's thinking, well, how can I attract a massive crowd here? And he figured, well, how about Andre and Hogan, for the championship? Andre is the heel and everything. And Vince said, hey, I'll make sure you get the back surgery and all that. And here's what we could do. Here's what the plan's going to be. And basically, if you believe Vince or anything he says, Andre was intent on basically retiring, just going quietly into the sunset, if you will. But then Vince, I guess, paid for his operation and said, no, I need you. So there's that aspect. They did talk about, the whole John Stosselen thing and all that, about what happened there. They touched upon that. And Hogan, give him credit. He didn't hide anything that was brought up to him about him going to Vince and tipping off Vince about Jesse Ventura wanting to, create a union, or, or basically him tipping off Vince and telling him, hey, this John Stossel from ABC he's not here to find out how popular I am. He's here to try to expose the business. And yeah, Hogan didn't shy away from that. You would think he's going to shy away from that or say something different, that might not be believable to what others have said. But no, Hogan actually, give him credit, told it straight. He told it straight. And yes, they brought up the steroid trial and everything. And basically Hogan said there, and everybody, backed him up on this in a way. That even Bret Hart backed him up, believe it or not, to an extent, that Hogan gave the federal government a curveball because the federal government wanted him to say something different about, different, to get Vince behind bars, back then. But he totally curveballed them and said something completely unexpected to the point that they had to find Vince not guilty. So there was that situation. But yeah, overall the episodes, they were good and everything. Like I said, they touched upon stuff we've already known about through other various documentaries, through WWE and other independent wrestling documentaries or docu-series like Dark Side of the Ring and Tales from the Territories and so on. They touched upon similar things at that time. They touched upon similar things at that time and everything. They did touch upon the whole Rita Chatterton situation, and that was always the one thing about some of these episodes. They would actually put not just disclaimers saying, hey, these interviews took place before, but they'd also put like little amendments at the end stating that this is what happened at this time, like as of this date, this is what's happened and this is what's happened, and so on. So they would basically talk about how in this time frame, in 1999, Sable settled and everything and all that. So again, the episodes were good. But I think what you need to do is be patient, until you get to basically get to like the final 3 episodes or the final 2 episodes, if you will, because then that's when things, start to get more interesting, if you will. Because they even show the interviews Vince would have with the likes of Bob Costas and this other guy, and how Vince would just basically get mad and frustrated and kind of let his Mr. McMahon character blend into the real him, the real him, and all that. So yeah, you really got to wait until you get to about the basically like the end of like the middle of the 4th episode to basically throughout the 5th and 6th episodes to really get into what you want, what you're expecting as far as this documentary goes. One interesting tidbit that Vince himself, I guess, if you believe anything that comes out of this man's mouth, it's up to you. He said he basically has like 3 computers, working in his mind. 3 computers, so it kind of makes him be, so it's kind of like, he's like one computer is making him think this, one computer is making him be what people are seeing right now, and then there's another one that wants to do something else, and it causes him to kind of like lose attention. Like he has a bit of ADHD, if you will, or attention disorder. And again, if you want to believe that to be true, then maybe that would explain essentially, maybe if you believe what he says, that's up to you, but that might explain why the product was so cuckoo, and downtrodden, if you will, throughout the past several years before he finally, stepped away for good. Why it was so like, what is this? What is that? One could say, if they believe him, that's up to you. One could say that maybe that's the reason, because his attention was all over the place and he didn't know what he wanted. Because the one thing they did try to do, some of the people that they interviewed, because they did interview Shane, they did interview Stephanie, they did interview Linda, they did interview Triple H, Paul Levesque, Paul Heyman, Hulk Hogan, John Cena, Tony Atlas, Dave Meltzer, of course, about 3 people from the Wall Street Journal, one lady, the founder of the USA Network. They interviewed her. A former VP of programming for USA. They interviewed her, and they also interviewed a lady that does this book on pro wrestling, and they interviewed another guy that wrote the book The Squared Circle, and they interviewed Phil Muchnick. And for people that don't know who Phil Muchnick is, it took me a bit to kind of recognize the name, but this is a name that's always been associated with wrestling, as well as some other stuff. That this is a guy that basically he'll tell it like it is. He'll tell it like it is when it comes to wrestling or anything that might spark his interest. And Phil Muchnick did not hold back when he was interviewed. He did not hold back in how he felt about Vince. Because even to this day, even back then and to this day, he's always had an issue with Vince. And basically, in a way, Muchnick was kind of like one of the first, if you will, wrestling, I wouldn't say total wrestling insiders, but kind of close to it, that would basically report on stuff they heard about behind the scenes, like the whole situation of On the Road and everything. And you think what you're seeing on television, even back in the 80s, all sunshine and roses, right? It's all bright and colorful, right? Oh, you don't know the dark truth behind the scenes. You don't know that. And he would say he's talked to people from the Ring Boy, those involved with the Ring Boy scandal, and so on, and all these other scandals that have come out, the Rita Chatterton and everything. And it's like, you could just tell that he does not believe a single word that would come out of Vince's mouth. Even now, Vince was trying to say, hey, what's being reported about me is not true. He would not believe it. He would not believe it whatsoever. And honestly, I don't think anybody would disagree with him. They wouldn't. Nobody would disagree with him on this. But Vince, he's the kind of guy that, he's the kind of guy in this docuseries that basically tries to counter what Muchnick says. That he feels Muchnick is nothing more than a guy that's looking for a hit piece on someone like Vince, and is not seeing, the whole circle, the whole story, if you will. And he's only hearing, things here and there and stuff like that. So yeah, it's like, you could tell, with Phil Muchnick, he does not like Vince. He maybe doesn't like the wrestling business in general. You got to wonder how he feels about someone like Tony Khan, if he reports on him. But anyway, yeah, he's just, he does not have any love for Vince, or maybe wrestling in general. And Vince obviously doesn't have any love for him. And those that still side with Vince feel, that side would probably feel the same way about Phil Muchnick. They probably don't like how he's very judgmental about stuff when it comes to the wrestling, sports, entertainment business. But, they touched upon a lot of interesting tidbits here and everything. Of course, they touched upon the whole thing with Owen Hart, of course, and Chris Benoit. They touched upon those situations and stuff, and, intersliced a lot of the, reports and everything. Like Martha Hart, having that conference, saying that she's filing a lawsuit, defamation lawsuit against WWE, because of what happened to Owen, and then finding out that basically WWE was not really responsible for what happened. That the people that were responsible for the apparatus that Owen was using, they're the ones that were responsible. They're the ones that basically, used a very defective, and according to Vince and others, and again, it's, believe these if you want to. A lot of people won't, and I'm someone that's like, I don't know what to believe anymore. But when you have even Bret Hart coming out and coming out in this docuseries, you have Bret Hart coming out in this docuseries and saying, "Hey, it was an accident. It wasn't WWE's fault. It wasn't Vince's fault. I can forgive him professionally for that." So believe anything you might hear, with your own opinion. But basically, Vince and others like Bret Hart kind of agreed it wasn't the company's fault. It wasn't Vince's fault. Now the only question is, how do you convince Martha Hart of that? I'm just saying. But again, they touched upon that. They touched upon Chris Benoit. They interviewed Chris Nowinski, who was a former superstar in WWE but had to retire because of a concussion. And they talked about, him being involved with the whole CTE and wanting to study Chris Benoit's brain to see if there was CTE issues, which there was. Vince kind of doesn't believe it too much, and some others don't, but still, it's the evidence is obviously there that it was. So Vince did call, from what we found out here, Chris Nowinski did talk to Vince, and Nowinski was able to, and Vince was, able to let Nowinski, or at least agree to let Nowinski talk to his performers, hold classes on, the seriousness of CTEs, and then that's one of the reasons they cut back and stuff. They also touched upon, WWE going from 14 to PG because of the sponsors. The bigger the sponsors, the more you gotta basically be lighter in your rating or something like that. And so on. But yeah, basically, long story short, as I was saying, they touched upon those two stories that you knew they were going to touch upon and stuff. And then, of course, like I said, if you're patient enough and you get to the last few episodes, mostly the last two, that's when things get a little juicy. That's when you start, seeing, things come out that you would expect. Maybe some things you did know, some things you probably didn't know. But, yeah, again, one of the things they did, especially with episode 6, is they would have these little disclaimers and amendments before, during, and after the episode, explaining, what's going on and stuff, like, what's the current situation. And they would do updated interviews with some individuals like Dave Meltzer and Bruce Pritchard, because they would list, or they would basically put in the on the screen along with the interview what year the interview took place. Like some interviews took place in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, so on. They would show, those years, basically showing up on the screen of essentially how long it's been, since the interviews were conducted, because like they said at the beginning of most of the episodes, these interviews were taking place before the allegations came out. And yeah, like I said, they did some updated interviews with Meltzer and Pritchard and so on. And all I can say for Bruce Pritchard is, Bruce, if I'm you, I start filling out my resume. Yeah. I start filling out my resume. I start looking around for another line of work. I start relying on maybe making more episodes of my Something to Wrestle podcast. Because Bruce Pritchard, in the updated portion that he did at the beginning of this year, essentially said what Vince McMahon said in his statement, days before the documentary came out. And that is the fact that he feels it was a hit piece. It was a garbage hit piece, and he didn't like it. And you know what's crazy? Is after they showed that updated interview with him, they would put an amendment of 2 days later, because it was 2 days later, after 2 days after they did that interview with him this year, where they show the reports of McMahon stepping away for good, selling his stock. They basically showed you, they showed you these little amendments, these little notes in between interviews of, basically what happened in between the time frame. So you got to wonder if Bruce probably feels the same way now that he did then. Because, again, if he still feels the same way now as he did then, if I'm him, I'd look for another line of work real soon. Because, again, he said it was a hit piece and stuff, and it's like, Bruce, you know what happened. You know what happened and everything. And you're trying to paint Vince in this light and everything, in this shining light. And look, no one is denying that maybe before these allegations came out, allegations that were swept under the rug, by the way, for such a long time, yeah, before these came out, maybe Vince was everything you and others, that are saying these similar kind of things. Maybe that's what he was outside of the ring, off camera. Maybe that's who he was until these allegations came out and became public. And here's the thing, people even say, there were people they interviewed in this, that even find it weird, if not ironic, that when Vince pushed his way in last year, bullied his way back in last year into power, that Stephanie decides to take a leave for good. Stephanie McMahon, his daughter, decides to take a leave for good and disassociate herself from him. So, again, if I'm Bruce Pritchard, I might want to consider looking for a new line of work real soon. That's just me. Because you can't tell me TKO ain't going to hear this. They're not going to hear this and be like, yeah, Bruce, we need to talk. But what's interesting about that too, and I'll talk about this in a minute, it sounds like Ari Emanuel didn't even want this to come out. Makes you wonder. But anyway, basically, Bruce Pritchard basically said the same thing Vince said in that statement, and it's like, yeah, Bruce, if I'm you, I'd probably find another line of work real soon. I would. But that's neither here nor there right now. That's up to him. Because obviously a lot of people are going to hear what he says at the end there. I guarantee you this. Solomonster, JD, Alex, Greg Morgan, everybody that's going to be watching this, they're going to look at what he says at that end, and they are basically going to be like, seriously, Bruce? Are you that effing serious? Just saying. And what's crazy is they showed an amendment that Vince McMahon canceled his final interviews for the Docu-Series once the allegations came out. And that's the most recent ones. The ones where we found out who was the anonymous emailer about what happened in 2022. That being Janelle Grant and everything. So basically because of that, he canceled his final interviews. And a lot of people are like, well, if he does something like that, and he is retiring for good, selling his stock shares and everything, basically disassociating himself from the business entirely, then basically that's a red flag of, yeah, something is there, that basically, proves that everything that's been reported is true to a 100% extent. I mean, the fact that he, and along with Ari Emanuel's help, wanted to try to buy the docuseries back, and Netflix said, hell no. Yeah, that's enough evidence for a lot of people to be like, yeah, that's just his way of admitting this. Yeah, the stuff you hear and hear about certain things that I'm alleged of doing or have done and all that. Yeah, it's true. All of it's true. So, yeah, it is. I will say it's quite a watch. It's quite a watch. There's no doubt about that. And, I can't say any more than that. Like I said, they do touch upon the Benoit situation. They do touch upon, the Owen Hart situation. They do touch upon him buying his dad out and everything. They do touch upon... Paul Heyman tells a story about, an intense situation between Shane and Vince that it's like, okay, obviously Vince, he's not just a major business mogul, but he's like, hey, if you want to take over my company, if you want control, you gotta take me out of the equation for good. So yeah, again, I recommend checking it out. The first several episodes are good, they're decent, but they're nothing new that we've not already heard about through the McMahon documentary or other docuseries like Dark Side of the Ring and Tales from the Territory and all that. Nothing really new there, except for just a few added tidbits here and there, and so on. And yeah, you just gotta wait until, like I say, you get to like midway to. I will say, I'll give you a time frame. Midway through episode 3, all the way to episode 6. That's when you should really start paying attention, because it does get very, very interesting from then on in. And again, the one thing they do from episode 1, and I think mostly like with episode 2, not episode 2, but episode 1, and I think maybe episode 3 or 4, is they have disclaimers and amendments at the beginning and at the end. And I think they even do it at the end of episode 3 and 2 as well. Basically, the amendment notes at the end of the episodes. They don't do those disclaimers before then on those 2, but they put amendment notes afterwards, so you know what, so you get an idea of what happened, as a result, like what the aftermath of everything that was talked about in those episodes, were, if you will. But again, I recommend you guys check it out. It's very good. But if I give you a time frame, go from halfway of episode 3 all the way to episode 6, and then that's where you'll definitely get the juiciness and all that. So, that's about all I could say on the McMahon Netflix documentary. I know a lot of people may not like it because they might feel like, we were all hyped for something juicy and we got squashed, for nothing, or we got squashed instead. Basically, what I'm saying is I know people might be critical about it by saying they were expecting and hyped up, and expecting something juicy, and instead they just got rotten squash, or they got something medium rare or red in the middle, if you know what I mean. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are down below in the comment section. Like the video, ring the bell for notification. Also subscribe to the channel, guys. It would really help me out. Also, check out my Teespring store. Link is in the description at the bottom. Get yourself some merchandise there I think you will enjoy. Also, check out where you can find my content elsewhere, from rumble.com at bwrosas, at vmo.com at bwrosas, odyssey.com at bwrosas. Also, check me out at all your favorite audio and at times video podcast platforms like iTunes, iHeartRadio, Radio Public, Audible, Pandora, Spotify for podcasters, and many more. Also, there's a Venmo and a Cash App if you want to help me in those areas as well. But guys, that's just my thoughts on the McMahon Netflix documentary, or docu-series, I should say, on Netflix. Again, I wasn't going to go over everything, but I just want to let you know that from what I've seen, my recommendation, start from about the midway point of episode 3, go from there. If you want to watch the whole thing, that's up to you, but basically what you'd be watching with episodes 1 to 2, and to extend the first half of episode 3, is essentially an updated version of the McMahon DVD documentary, as well as it feels like you're watching more of a transition in some of those episodes to a docu-series or documentary report and telling of Hogan and Hogan and so on, of Hulk Hogan and other stuff as well. But guys, that's all I can really say about it. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. And until next time, again, I will talk to you later, but I do recommend checking it out.